Welcome to the Annual Compliance Certification Module. This module is presented by the Kentucky Environmental Compliance Assistance Program. The Environmental Compliance Assistance Program, or ECAP, is part of the Kentucky Department for Environmental Protection. ECAP exists to provide services that increase environmental knowledge and encourage positive behavioral changes. ECAP does this to improve regulatory compliance, achieve exceptional performance, and to enhance the quality of Kentucky's environment and communities. The Annual Compliance Certification, or ACC, is a duty imposed upon all holders of air quality permits in Kentucky. So why is a permit holder required to submit the ACC? Well, it is a direct requirement of the Clean Air Act and is codified in the Kentucky Administrative Regulations. The purpose of reporting is for facilities to investigate their air emission sources, confirm proper monitoring and record keeping, and ensure the authorities with their compliance with air quality regulations and conditions of their permit. In addition, the ACC requires sworn certification, signed by a responsible official, to provide greater assurance and responsibility of a facility's compliance with air quality regulations. After completion, your ACC must be signed by a responsible official, which is defined on this slide. For more information on what qualifies someone as a responsible official, click the link entitled 401 KAR 052 001, Section 162. This is the certification statement which the responsible official signs. It states that the information is true, accurate, and complete under a penalty of law. False statements are punishable by fines or imprisonment. As the name suggests, the ACC is due annually and will report on January 1st through December 31st of the preceding year. The ACC must be submitted by January 30th of the current year. Failure to submit it in a timely manner is a violation of the requirements of air quality permits. Certain facilities have multiple permits or locations, each with their own permit. In situations like these, the facility should submit an ACC for each permit that has been issued. Be sure to specify appropriate date ranges if a new or revised permit has been issued during the reporting period. If a permit is renewed or revised within the reporting year, facilities can submit 2 ACCs, one for each permit, or combine the information onto one ACC form and use some type of marking to clarify new versus old requirements. If you were issued your permit in the last year, you will need to certify compliance beginning with the issuance date of that permit. If the facility was recently issued a permit and is not yet operating, you will need to submit the ACC, but make a statement regarding the construction or operational status. If you are operating some emission units and not others, be sure to indicate the units that are not operating or date ranges in which they were not operating. Now that the introduction is through, let's start talking about how to submit the ACC. Before we review the form itself, let's talk about where to access it. The easiest way is to follow the link on the screen to the Division for Air Quality's Permit Required reporting page. Here, you can find a direct link to the form, instructions, and an explanation of submittal requirements. Minor modifications to the form are allowable, but significant changes must be pre-approved by your regional office. One modification that you can make is to have additional or duplicate pages in order to accommodate the number of applicable permit conditions or requirements for the facility. This is the Compliance Certification Form. Boxes 1, 3, 4, and 6 are for basic information concerning your business, including name, street address, and telephone number. Also on the form, Box 2 is for your agency interest number, or AI number. The AI number can be found on the front page of your air quality permit. On this page, you will also find the permit number and source ID number, which go in boxes 5 and 7 respectively. Here, you can see the permit number in box 5 and the source ID number in box 7. Box 8 now has a question regarding any emission unit that is not in continuous compliance. Please answer it accordingly. In box 8, the reporting period is January 1st to December 31st of the preceding year, unless you have the special case of a new permit or permit revisions, in which case you will want to adjust your reporting period to reflect the dates those permits were effective. You will also notice that the signature block has been moved to the first page. There are 3 sections in which you will put compliance information for emission units. One is for the units in compliance, one for those subject to future compliance dates, and one, which is actually 2 pages, for units that are not in compliance. Let's begin by taking a look at the first section, 10A, Units in Compliance. This is Table 10A and is used to document units in compliance for the entire reporting period. The first column is for identifying the emission units and has been merged with the permit ID column. This is consistent throughout the form. You will want to use the numbering system set by your particular permit. You will only need to fill out the permit ID number if you are submitting information for more than one permit on the same form. You can find the emission unit numbers in Section B at the top of your permit page. Note that each unit will have multiple pages of information, and many facilities have multiple emission units. The second column is for permit conditions or applicable regulations. Here, you may list the permit condition as found in Section B2A of the permit, or you can list the actual regulation from the Kentucky Administrative Regulations. In the third column, the emission unit description should be the same as that used in the permit for the emission unit or emission point name with basic description details. For example, boiler number 1, co-boiler, or source wide for Section D limits. In column 4, the permit limit or requirement may be a pollutant limit or an operating limit, such as 20% opacity or less than 10,000 tons per year coal burned on a rolling 12-month total basis. A requirement could be something like the permit stating that a spray coating booth can only be operated with filters in place. There may be several permit limits for a single EP emission point or EU emission unit. You will need to make several rows to incorporate all permit limits and requirements. Column 5 is for actual emission or status of requirement, which is where you will put your actual gathered data regarding the emissions. The actual emissions or status of requirement may be actual usage, or it could be another parameter to be measured against the limit. For example, for weekly visible limit, if your recording log indicates that the highest record was 12%, you can record max 12, or you might also record less than 20. This column can be left blank unless there is a specific limit on emissions, usage, or throughput. Column 6 is for the method for determining compliance. This is generally your compliance demonstration method, as listed in the permit. Make sure you include whether the method provided continuous or intermittent data. We will go over the difference between those two terms later in this video. Also, note that this is page 2 of 5. Be sure to fill this out. You will have multiple pages of this form, and numbering will help you keep them in order. Now, let's go over the difference between continuous and intermittent data collection. Continuous data collection means that the data is collected, analyzed, or recorded at least once every 15 minutes. If there are gaps in the data, the method cannot be considered continuous. Intermittent collection is all other methods that are not continuous, unless there is an automatic continuous emissions monitor. It is likely that most methods will be intermittent. One very common intermittent method is weekly visible emissions observations. Now, let's talk about the difference between continuous and intermittent compliance. Continuous compliance means that based on all of the data available, whether that be monitoring data, record-keeping data, etc., there is no evidence or reason to believe that a source was not in compliance. The source can claim continuous compliance even when the data is intermittent due to an intermittent method of determining compliance. Intermittent compliance means that there is evidence or reason to believe that the source was not in compliance at all times for a given term or condition. Failure to meet any permit term or condition is considered intermittent compliance and should also be listed in Section 10C1 and 10C2 to reflect being out of compliance. If you are looking for an example of how to record a unit that was out of compliance, look at this slide. You will need to repeat a single line for every permit limit. Do not combine permit limits for a single emission point or unit. You may have several rows for a single emission point if the emission point was out of compliance or records were not kept to show that the unit was in compliance. Do not put it on the 10A page for units that were in compliance. There are several compliance methods or permit limits, and they can range from qualitative to quantitative. They may be a rolling total calculation, a log or record-keeping requirement, or possibly an operating requirement. Be sure to list all of these and describe them in each column of 10A. An actual emissions column, as you saw in the last slide, does not have to be a value but can be a statement. Also, when you report a numeric value, be sure to include the unit of measurement. Use common terms in the descriptions or those terms defined within the permit. Avoid using any jargon or acronyms. Division for Air Quality Inspectors are going to be reading several of these reports from a variety of sources. Make your report as clear and concise as possible. Pull all of the elements into a logical and easy-to-understand report. The next section, 10B, is for units subject to future compliance dates. Many facilities will not have anything to put in Table 10B, but this form is for units that have new or upcoming rules or regulations that will apply, or testing compliance dates that will occur in the future. Here is an example from 2016 for the changes to boiler requirements. It shows how the permittee shall demonstrate compliance and the date by which compliance is required. If your facility is not subject to future compliance dates, just make a simple statement to that effect, but do not leave this section blank. This is an example of how to fill out Form 10B if your facility does not need to meet any upcoming or future regulations. The next section, which is actually 2 pages, 10C1 and 10C2, is used for units that are not in continuous compliance. Section 10C1, Emission Units Not in Compliance. If at any point the emission unit was not in compliance, even if it was just once or records were not taken, then you must list it under the Units Not in Continuous Compliance table. The first page is exactly the same as those for units in compliance, so be sure that you are filling out the correct form. Under Actual Emissions or Status of Requirement, name your exceedance. For example, if the max recorded visual emission was 35% and there was a permit limit of 20%, note that in the permit limit or requirement column. If records were not taken, that must be noted as well. This is Section 10C2 and is also for units not in compliance. Carry over the emission points or emission units identification from Table 10C1 and then list out the reason that the unit was not in compliance, whether the data was not recorded, there was a malfunction, etc. It is also a good idea to put the date or date in which the error occurred, how or why the error occurred, and how it was corrected or how the error may be prevented in the future. Here are several examples of how to fill out Section 10C2. As you can see, the permit ID numbers are carried over from 10C1. In the second column, the specific reason for noncompliance, the date in which the error occurred, and the actions that were taken or will be taken to correct the noncompliance are included in detail. Once the report is complete, the responsible official has to sign or certify the report using the signature area on the front page. That was a lot of information, so let's go over some of the major points of today. Remember to report clearly, logically, and in a format that is easily understandable. Be sure to include units to all values and use common terms or terms that are in your permit. And avoid using any jargon or acronyms. Make sure that your facility is certifying compliance with all of the conditions stated in the permit, not just emission limitations. If a permit is updated within the reporting year, facilities can submit 2 ACCs, one for each permit, or combine the information into one ACC form and use some type of marking to clarify new versus old requirements. All facilities with an active permit should submit an ACC, even if they did not operate in Kentucky during the entire reporting period. Be sure to include both the good and the bad on your reports, the operations that are in compliance and those out of compliance. Out of compliance activities include notices of violation the facility has received, malfunctions, emission exceedances, gaps in record keeping, deviations from the operations, etc. Also, remember that the submission date for the ACC is January 30th, with a reporting period of January 1st through December 31st of the preceding year. There are 2 ways that you can submit your ACC. The first and least preferred method is by mail sent to your regional office. If you are a Title V major source permit, then your report must also be sent to the EPA in Atlanta as well. The regional office address is located on the cover page of your permit. The second and more preferred method is submitting your ACC online through EEC eForms. Make sure to use the correct form ID number, or else the report could end up in the wrong place. If you are a Title V major source permit, you will also need to submit your ACC to the EPA in Atlanta. You can do this by using their online submittal website, CEDRI. Please remember, all formats in which the reports are submitted must contain the required certification signature. For further information, the Kentucky Division for Air Quality has an entire page devoted to the ACC and semi-annual reports. Here is a map of the Division for Air Quality regional office boundaries with contact information. Make sure to double-check the regional office locations because they do move from time to time. The current addresses are available on this slide. If you have specific questions regarding your requirements and reporting, please contact your regional office inspector. If you have any additional questions or concerns, please contact the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program at 502-782-6189 or email us at envhelp@ky.gov.